What happens when the coldest man in Manhattan gets trapped in an elevator with the one woman who refuses to be impressed by him? Adam Hargrove built walls so high no one ever dared climb them, until Evelyn Reyes walked in, mop, bucket and all, and looked at him like he was just another inconvenience. She didn't know she was about to become the only thing he couldn't control. Let me introduce you to our new app, Allure TV. It's super simple to get started. You log in with Google or your email. In a few seconds you're in. This here is the home screen. Look how amazing it is. We feature dozens of intense, uncensored romance stories, organized by genre. We have mafia, billionaire, forbidden love, and contract romance themes. We have absolutely everything you could ever want. And the best part, no ads and no interruptions. Now look at this. Click here on the audio and start listening right away. You can even choose your preferred language. There's Portuguese, English, German, French. If you prefer to read, just click here on the ebook and that's it. The whole story appears for you to read at your own pace. And you can even interact. You are welcome to rate the story with stars and leave a comment. You can also add your favorite stories to a playlist and access them whenever you like. Do you like what you see? Go ahead and log in now. It is simple and free. You can find the link in the first pinned comment. The Hargrove Tower pierced the Manhattan skyline like a declaration, all steel, glass and controlled ambition. At 7:43 on a Tuesday morning, the lobby was already alive with the kind of energy that only exists in cities that never truly sleep. Heels clicked against marble floors, phones buzzed with urgent notifications, coffee cups steamed in hurried hands. Everyone moved with purpose. Everyone knew exactly where they belonged. Adam Hargrove stepped through the revolving glass doors at precisely the moment he always did. Not because he was a man of rigid routine, but because his entire world had been engineered to leave no room for surprise. 32 years old, CEO of the most aggressive real estate development firm on the East Coast, and dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body. The watch on his left wrist, a vintage Patek Philippe, caught the morning light as his thumb scrolled through emails with the focused indifference of someone who had stopped seeing people as anything more than variables in an equation. He didn't look up when he stepped into the elevator. He never did. Evelyn Reyes had been in that elevator for 40 seconds before he arrived, her cleaning cart tucked against the far wall, a pair of earbuds hanging around the collar of her uniform. 24 years old, with dark eyes that noticed everything, and a mouth that had never once learned to stay quiet when it should. She worked for Clean Core Solutions, the third-party company contracted to maintain the building, which, in the unspoken language of corporate hierarchies, meant she was essentially invisible. She looked up when the doors opened. He didn't look up at all. The doors slid shut behind him. The elevator began its ascent. Evelyn pulled one earbud free and glanced at the panel. He'd pressed the 30th floor. She was heading to the 14th. 16 floors of silence stretched ahead of them, like a challenge neither had agreed to accept. Then, somewhere between the 11th and 13th floor, the elevator shuddered. The lights flickered once. Then the whole car jolted, not violently, but with the kind of mechanical finality that made the stomach drop, and stopped completely. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. Evelyn looked at the ceiling, then at the panel, then exhaled through her nose with the particular brand of patience that only comes from a life that has already handed you too many inconveniences to count. Seriously? Not today. Adam's thumb stilled on his phone screen. He looked up for the first time and found her already looking directly at him, completely unintimidated, as if his presence in the elevator was the least impressive thing about the situation. He blinked. She didn't. "I'll call the front desk," he said, his voice carrying the automatic authority of someone who had never once questioned whether he'd be listened to. "No signal," Evelyn replied, holding up her own phone as evidence. "I already checked." His jaw tightened slightly. He tried his own phone. 1 bar. Gone. He pressed the emergency button on the panel, and a faint buzzing sound confirmed that somewhere, someone had received the alert. "They'll have us out in 15 minutes, he said. "Or 40, she said, sliding down the wall until she was sitting on the floor with her back against the steel, long legs stretched out in front of her. She settled in with the ease of someone who had made peace with things she couldn't control. Depends on which technician is on call. He stared at her. She looked up at him with those dark, unbothered eyes. You can keep standing if you want, but that suit looks expensive, and you look like a man who hasn't stopped moving in about 3 years. Something in Adam's chest did something it hadn't done in a very long time. It paused. He didn't sit. Not yet. But he lowered his phone, and for the first time that morning, possibly that week, he was not looking at a screen. He was looking at her, at the slight smudge of tiredness beneath her eyes that suggested she'd been here since before sunrise, at the way her hands rested in her lap, unhurried and unbothered, at the name tag clipped slightly crooked to her uniform. Evelyn. "You're not worried," he said. It wasn't a question. "About the elevator?" She tilted her head. "Not particularly. Should I be?" "Most people panic." "Most people don't work the early shift 5 days a week," she said simply. "You learn pretty fast that panicking doesn't move the elevator any faster." Adam looked at her for a moment longer than he intended. There was something deeply disarming about a person who had no interest in performing calm, who simply was calm, in that rare, grounded way that couldn't be faked or bought or trained. He had been surrounded his entire adult life by people who either feared him or wanted something from him. This woman, sitting cross-legged on the floor of his elevator in his building, looked at him like he was simply another Tuesday morning inconvenience. He wasn't sure if he found it irritating or fascinating. Maybe both. He cleared his throat, looked at the ceiling, then, almost against his better judgment, loosened his tie by exactly 1/2 inch. The elevator stayed still. Neither of them spoke, but the silence, that heavy, loaded silence, had already changed into something neither of them had a name for yet. The emergency light inside the elevator cast everything in a soft amber glow, the kind that belonged in late-night bars, not corporate buildings. It softened the sharp edges of Adam's expression and made Evelyn's dark eyes catch the light in a way that was impossible to ignore, though he was trying his best to do exactly that. 14 minutes had passed. Adam had checked his watch 3 times. Evelyn had checked exactly 0 times. She'd pulled a small thermos from her bag, matte black, dented at the base from what looked like years of loyal service, and was holding it with both hands, the way people hold things that have become comfort without them realizing it. The smell hit him before he could prepare for it. Coffee, old coffee, the kind brewed hours before dawn and carried in a bag through the cold and never quite reheated properly. "That coffee," he said before he could stop himself, "smells like it was made yesterday." Evelyn looked up, one eyebrow lifted, not offended, not defensive, amused. "It was made at 4:30 this morning, which, for the record, is basically yesterday. You start at 4:30? Building doesn't clean itself." She took a slow sip, completely unbothered by his tone. "Besides, the early hours are the best part. Nobody's here. Just me and the marble floors and whatever podcast I'm listening to." She tilted the thermos slightly toward him, a gesture that was half offering, half daring. "Want some?" He looked at the thermos, then at her. "I don't drink cold coffee." "Then you've never been tired enough," she said simply, and took another sip. Something about that sentence landed in the middle of Adam's chest and stayed there. He turned away, pressing his palm flat against the steel wall and grounding himself, or trying to. The metal was cool beneath his hand. The elevator was completely still. His phone had 2 bars now, then none, flickering uselessly. He should have been frustrated. He was the kind of man who was always frustrated when things fell outside his control. Instead, he found himself lowering himself to the floor. Not all the way. He sat with his back against the opposite wall, knees up, elbows resting on them. Still composed, still contained, but no longer pretending to be somewhere he wasn't. Evelyn watched him do it without saying a word, but the corner of her mouth moved. "Don't," he said. "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." "I was going to say you look more human down there," she said. "That's a compliment." He studied her face for a moment, searching for the performance, the nervousness, the calculation, the awareness of who he was. There was none. She wasn't pretending to be comfortable. She simply was. "What's the podcast?" he asked. She blinked, clearly not expecting that. "True crime, cold cases mostly." At 4:30 in the morning. Best time for it. Quiet. Focused. She wrapped both hands tighter around the thermos. What do you listen to? I don't. Nothing? I work. On the commute. On the elevator, he said. On the walk from the car, in the 2 minutes between meetings. He paused. I haven't listened to music, or anything, in probably 4 years. Evelyn looked at him then, in a way that made his spine feel strangely exposed. Not with pity, not with judgment, just with the kind of quiet attention that most people never actually offer, too distracted by what they want to say next. That sounds exhausting, she said finally. Not the work. The silence you fill with more work, like you're afraid of what you'd hear if you stopped. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't confirm it. 22 minutes had passed. The amber light hummed faintly above them. Somewhere deep in the building's shaft, a mechanical sound echoed, something being assessed, adjusted, then nothing again. Do you always talk this much to strangers? He asked. Only the ones who need it, she said. And you think I need it. I think you haven't talked to someone who wasn't paid to agree with you in a very long time, Evelyn said. Not cruel, just precise, the way a person is precise when they've spent years observing people from the edges of rooms. And I think that's probably lonelier than you let yourself admit. The word landed between them like something fragile. Adam's jaw worked silently for a moment. He looked at the floor, at the faint scuff marks on his shoes from where he'd rushed through the parking garage that morning, at his own hands, ringless, tensed slightly at the knuckles, resting on his knees. You don't know me, he said. Quiet, not defensive, almost careful. No, Evelyn agreed, but I know that look. What look? She met his eyes across the small, amber-lit space between them. The one that says you built something so big you forgot to leave a door for yourself. The elevator shuddered. The lights brightened. The familiar hum of movement returned beneath them. Adam stood first, reflexively, automatically, the CEO reassembling himself in real time. Posture straight, expression controlled, phone already rising toward his hand. Evelyn capped her thermos, stood, tucked it back into her bag. The doors opened on the 14th floor. She stepped out without drama, without a backward glance, then stopped just before the doors could close, her hand resting lightly on the frame. She looked at him once more, just once. Get some sleep, Mr. Adam, he said, without thinking. Something shifted in her expression, subtle, but real. Get some sleep, Adam. The doors closed. He rode the remaining 16 floors to his office in complete silence. No phone, no emails, no scrolling. Just the hum of the elevator and the ghost of cold coffee in the air and the strange, unshakable feeling that something had just happened that his calendar had absolutely no category for. Adam Hargrove had a mind built for retention. Contract clauses, quarterly projections, the precise wording of a negotiation that had taken place 3 years ago in a boardroom in Chicago. All of it lived in his memory with the kind of clarity that had made him dangerous in business since his mid-20s. He remembered numbers, dates, faces. He remembered details that other people discarded as irrelevant. He had not, in recent memory, been unable to stop thinking about a name. Evelyn. It had been on the badge. Slightly crooked, clipped too far to the left, the kind of small imperfection that should have been entirely forgettable. He'd noticed it for half a second in the elevator, and it had stayed with him through a board meeting, 2 calls with the legal team, a working lunch he'd barely tasted, and now, at 6:14 in the evening, into the back of his car as his driver navigated the slow crawl of midtown traffic toward his apartment on the Upper East Side. He hadn't searched for her, hadn't asked his assistant, hadn't pulled the CleanCore contract to cross-reference staff assignments. He was aware, with some discomfort, that the restraint was deliberate, because searching would mean admitting he wanted to find her. And Adam Hargrove had not wanted something he couldn't immediately acquire in a very long time. The unfamiliarity of it sat in his chest, like a stone he didn't know how to put down. Evelyn was on the phone when she got home, dropping her bag by the door of her Brooklyn apartment, with the practiced exhaustion of someone who had been on her feet since before the sun. The apartment was small but deliberate, plants on the windowsill, a gallery wall of prints she'd collected from street markets, a worn leather couch that had survived 2 moves and 1 very bad breakup. Okay, but what did he look like? Her friend Diana demanded from the other end of the line. Evelyn pulled her ponytail loose and kicked off her shoes. I literally just told you everything. You told me a man got stuck in the elevator with you. That's not everything, Ev. That's the opening sentence. Evelyn dropped onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. She'd replayed the conversation more times than she wanted to admit on her subway ride home, not obsessively, but in the way you replay something that surprised you, the way he'd sat down on the elevator floor, the way he'd said his own name like it had been waiting somewhere near the surface and escaped before he could stop it. He had cold eyes, she said finally. Cold how? Like someone turned the color up, but forgot to turn the warmth on. She paused. Grey, or maybe a dark blue. Hard to tell in that light. And nothing. The elevator moved. I got out. End of story. Diana was quiet for exactly 1 second, the silence of someone who did not believe a single word they'd just heard. So you're doing the thing. I'm not doing a thing. The thing where you describe someone in way too much detail and then pretend you weren't paying attention. Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, stared harder at the ceiling. He was just a person, Di, she said. A very tightly wound person who clearly hasn't slept properly in years and has no idea how to exist without a purpose. She pulled a throw blanket over her legs. I felt kind of bad for him, honestly. Right, Diana said, in a tone that communicated exactly how much she believed that. The following morning, the 18th floor of Hargrove Tower smelled like fresh paint and ambition. Adam was doing something he rarely did, a walkthrough of a space that was being redesigned for a new acquisition team. His architect walked beside him, pointing at walls and talking about open-plan flow and natural light. Adam was nodding at appropriate intervals. He heard her before he saw her. Not her voice, just the sound of a cartwheel with a slightly uneven roll, the faint squeak of it against the hallway floor. He knew that sound now, apparently. He turned before he consciously decided to. Evelyn came around the corner from the service corridor, earbuds in, head slightly down, focused on navigating the cart through the narrow hallway junction. She hadn't seen him. His architect was still talking. Adam wasn't listening. Evelyn looked up and stopped. The cart stopped with her. For a fraction of a second, something crossed her face that she immediately rearranged into composure. Not quite a smile. Not quite surprise. Something in between, held carefully still. He took 3 steps toward her, deliberate, unhurried. Evelyn. She pulled one earbud free. The way she did it, slow, without urgency, as if she were deciding whether to give him the full attention of both ears, struck him as one of the most quietly confident things he'd ever witnessed. You remembered, she said. The badge, he replied. Then, because it was truer than that and he was tired of being imprecise, and the conversation. Something in her expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, the way light changes in a room when a cloud passes outside. Her chin lifted slightly, her fingers rested still on the cart handle. I didn't catch yours, she said. Yesterday. Adam Hargrove. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind of silence that happens when a name lands with more weight than expected, when context rearranges itself around 2 syllables and the air in the room quietly realigns. Her eyes held his, dark, steady, reading something in his face that he hadn't offered to anyone in years. The Adam Hargrove, she said. Not a question, not impressed, just precise. Just Adam, he said. She looked at him for 1 moment longer than the situation required. Then she reinserted her earbud, not rudely, but with the particular grace of a woman who knew exactly how to end a conversation on her own terms, and pushed the cart forward. She was 3 steps away when he realized his pulse had not returned to its normal, unremarkable rhythm. He turned back toward his architect, who had finally stopped talking and was watching him with an expression that asked no questions out loud. Adam straightened his jacket. You were saying something about the east-facing windows. But his mind was still in the hallway, still standing in front of a woman who had looked at him like she was deciding, slowly, deliberately, and entirely on her own schedule, what he was worth. The coffee shop was called Grounded. It sat half a block from Rockefeller Center, tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookstore that had somehow survived the last decade with its soul intact. The kind of place that didn't advertise, didn't need to. Its reputation lived in the muscle memory of the neighborhood, in the line that formed before the sign was even flipped to open. Dark wood walls, Edison bulbs strung low. The smell of espresso ground fresh every 30 minutes, thick enough to feel like a second coat over everything. Adam had chosen it specifically because no one who mattered to his world would think to look for him here. He arrived 4 minutes early, which was unusual. He was always exactly on time. Punctuality as power, as signal, as control. Being early meant he'd been thinking about it. He sat at the corner table with his back to the wall out of instinct, ordered a black coffee he hadn't decided he wanted yet, and told himself this was professional. Operational feedback from the contracted staff, due diligence. He almost believed it. Evelyn arrived at 3 minutes past the hour, which he suspected was also deliberate. She came through the door in dark jeans, a fitted rust-colored turtleneck, and a leather jacket with a collar she'd turned up against the October wind. Her hair was down, loose dark falling past her shoulders, and she was carrying nothing but her phone and a quiet confidence that took up more space than most people twice her size. She spotted him immediately, didn't wave, walked over like she'd decided something on the way here and wasn't changing her mind. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, pulling out the chair across from him. "Adam," he corrected. She sat down. "Adam." The way she said it the second time was different. Less testing, more settled, like she'd filed it somewhere real. The server appeared. Evelyn ordered a latte with oat milk and the particular ease of someone who knew exactly what she wanted and didn't need a menu to confirm it. Adam watched her do it and felt something in his chest loosen by a fraction, the way a knot shifts without fully releasing. "So," she said, folding her hands on the table. Her nails were clean, short, unpainted. "Operational feedback." He held her gaze. "You don't believe that's why we're here." "I believe that's what you told yourself," she said. "I'm curious what the real answer is." A beat of silence. The espresso machine hissed from behind the counter. Somewhere near the window, 2 people laughed at something on a shared phone screen. "You said something in the elevator," Adam said finally, "about building something so big you forget to leave a door for yourself." He paused. "I've thought about it more than I expected to." Evelyn studied him the way she had in the hallway, careful, unhurried, like she was reading something written in a language she was fluent in, but still chose to translate slowly. Most people don't like hearing things like that. Most people aren't used to someone saying it without wanting something in return. Her latte arrived. She wrapped both hands around the warm ceramic, that gesture again, that same grounded, unhurried warmth, and looked at him over the rim. "What do you think I want?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. And then, quieter. "That's what's disorienting." The honesty of it surprised even him. It sat between them on the dark wood table, unguarded, a thing he couldn't take back and wasn't sure he wanted to. Evelyn set her cup down. "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to regardless." The corner of her mouth moved. "Fair." She tilted her head slightly. "Do you actually like what you do? The company, the deals, the whole—" She gestured loosely at the invisible architecture of his life. "Empire?" "Yes," he said. Then, "Mostly." "What's the part that isn't mostly?" He turned the coffee cup slowly in his hand. Outside, a yellow cab cut off a cyclist, and both parties expressed their feelings loudly. The city, indifferent as ever, moved around them. "The part where it's the only thing," he said. Low, careful, like he was handling something that could break under the wrong pressure. When the only answer you have to "who are you" is a job title, it starts to feel less like an identity and more like a sentence. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, not filling the space, not rushing to soften it, just letting it exist. "That's the most honest thing I've heard someone say in a long time," she said. "Don't tell anyone," he said. "It'll ruin the brand." She laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that happened without permission, bright and unguarded, spilling out before she could shape it into something more careful. He felt it like a small, precise warmth somewhere behind his sternum. The conversation moved after that, not with the careful navigation of two people managing impressions, but with the loose, slightly dangerous ease of people who have stopped pretending. She told him about studying environmental policy for 2 years before the money ran out, about her mother in Queens, who called every Sunday and always asked the same 3 questions in the same order, about the way the city looked at 4 a.m. when it was just her and the marble and the hum of a building breathing. He listened the way he never listened, without waiting for his turn. Just listening. At some point, without either of them marking the moment it happened, their knees drifted beneath the table. His knee. Her knee. The soft collision of denim and fine wool. Barely there, barely anything. The kind of contact that could be dismissed as accidental with complete plausibility. Neither of them moved. The table was small. The world outside was large and loud and indifferent. But in the amber-lit corner of a coffee shop, half a block from Rockefeller Center, the space between two people who had no business being here together was getting smaller by degrees, and neither of them was doing anything at all to stop it. Evelyn looked down at her cup, then back up at him. "I should probably get back," she said, but she didn't move. "Probably," Adam agreed. He didn't either. Outside, the October wind pressed against the glass. Inside, the warmth held, fragile, electric, impossible to name, and neither of them reached for their coats. The snowstorm hit Manhattan on a Thursday night without much warning. By 8 o'clock, the weather apps had upgraded their cheerful snowflake icons to something more serious: accumulation warnings, wind advisories, the particular kind of alert that makes a city of 8 million people collectively decide to stay exactly where they are. The streets below Hargrove Tower emptied with unusual speed. Taxis vanished. The last food delivery bikes disappeared around corners like they knew something the pedestrians didn't yet. Adam was still at his desk on the 30th floor. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that by 9:30 his assistant had gone home, the legal team had gone home, and the floor was so quiet he could hear the wind pressing against the floor-to-ceiling glass like it was looking for a way in. The city lights blurred through the snow into something almost soft, Manhattan rendered impressionistic. Its hard edges dissolved. He was reviewing a contract amendment he'd already reviewed twice. He knew he was reviewing it a third time because he wasn't actually reading it. He picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again. He had Evelyn's number, because she'd given it to him at the end of the coffee shop, written on the back of a grounded receipt in handwriting that was quick and slightly slanted, like her thoughts moved faster than her pen. "In case the elevator breaks again," she'd said, with that expression that was never quite a smile but always something better. He'd transferred it to his contacts and not used it for 11 days. He pressed call before he had a reason to. It rang 3 times. He was already composing the exit strategy. Wrong number, pocket dial, doesn't matter. When she picked up. "It's late," she said. Not accusatory, just observational, the way she said most things. "I know." He leaned back in his chair. Outside, the snow thickened. "Are you home?" "Just got in. Subway was a disaster." The sound of a bag dropping, a door closing. "Are you still at the office?" "Yes. Of course you are." He could hear the faint smile in it. "Is there a reason you called, or are you just practicing?" He almost said something deflecting, something with the smooth, practiced shape of a man who never needed anything. But the floor was empty, and the snow was pressing against the glass, and he was sitting alone in a building that had his name on it, and somehow felt less like home than anywhere he'd ever been. "I'm not sure," he said. "Both, maybe." She didn't rush to fill the space. That quality of hers, the willingness to let silence exist without patching it, was something he was beginning to understand as a kind of rare intelligence. "Tell me something," she said finally. "Something real." He turned his chair toward the window. The city below was muffled and white and unusually gentle. "My father died when I was 16, he said. The words came out without scaffolding, No preamble, no careful framing, no version edited for palatability. Just the sentence, plain and heavy, the way true things tend to be. Evelyn didn't gasp, didn't pivot into condolences, didn't say "I'm so sorry" in that automatic way people use to signal that they've received the information and are now moving past it. She just said, "How old was he?" Something in Adam's chest cracked open, not painfully, more like a window in a room that had been sealed too long. 51, he said. Heart attack. He was in a meeting. He paused, which I always thought was either the most on-brand thing imaginable or the saddest. Maybe both, Evelyn said softly. Maybe both, he agreed. He stood and walked toward the glass, one hand in his pocket, watching the snow accumulate on the ledge outside. There was something about the storm that made the truth easier, the way the city had gone quiet, the way normal consequence felt suspended. He left me the company, Adam continued. So not in the planned way. There was no succession timeline, no gradual handover. He just died, and I was suddenly responsible for 400 employees and a board of directors who looked at a 16-year-old and saw liability. He exhaled. I spent the next decade making sure no one ever looked at me like that again. And now, Evelyn asked, now no one looks at me like that. He pressed 2 fingers lightly against the cold glass. They look at me like the building, solid, permanent, useful, but not warm, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not warm, he confirmed. He heard her shift, the soft sound of her settling somewhere, a couch maybe, the creak of something familiar and worn. He found himself constructing the image of her apartment from the details she'd mentioned. The plants, the prints, the city outside a window that was probably smaller than his, but felt more lived in. My father used to say, Evelyn said slowly, that the problem with carrying too much weight is that after a while you forget what it feels like to put it down. You start to think the weight is you. Adam said nothing for a long moment. Then, he sounds like he was smarter than mine. He was a plumber from Queens who read philosophy on the weekends, she said. So, different kind of smart. He laughed. Not the polished social laugh he deployed in rooms full of people who expected it, something shorter, quieter, involuntary. The kind of laugh that only happens when something genuinely catches you off guard. They talked for another hour and 40 minutes. He didn't check his phone once. He didn't think about the contract on his desk or the board meeting on Friday or the acquisition call with the Seoul team scheduled for Monday morning. He thought about none of it. He stood at the window and watched the snow and talked to a woman who asked questions like she was genuinely interested in the answers. Not performing interest, not mining for leverage, not waiting for her turn. Just there, in the particular way that very few people ever manage to be. When they finally said goodnight, not because either of them had somewhere to be, but because the conversation had reached that natural, satisfied pause that good conversations sometimes find, Adam stood for a moment with the phone still in his hand. The snow had softened the city into something almost unrecognizable. He pressed his palm flat against the cold glass and felt his own pulse in his fingertips, steady, slightly faster than usual, and carrying something unfamiliar in its rhythm, something that felt dangerously close to wanting. And it was the wanting more than anything else that he didn't know what to do with. The photograph was taken on a Saturday evening in Soho. Neither of them had planned it, which was perhaps the most honest thing about it. Adam had texted that afternoon with the particular terseness of a man who was pretending to be casual about something he'd been thinking about since Tuesday. There's a place in Soho, good food, no reservations needed. Evelyn had stared at her phone for 30 seconds, then typed back, "What time?" which was her version of yes, filtered through the same pride that kept her from arriving anywhere looking like she'd been waiting. The restaurant was called Linen, small, warm, the kind of place where the lighting seemed personally invested in making everyone look their best. Exposed brick walls, candles in amber glass, a menu written in chalk on a board above the bar. It was exactly the kind of place that didn't appear in corporate expense reports, which was precisely why Adam had chosen it. Evelyn had worn a deep green dress, fitted, simple, with a neckline that suggested rather than declared, and heels that added 3 inches and made her footsteps sound like punctuation on the cobblestone outside. Adam had seen her come through the door and spent a full 2 seconds doing nothing at all, which was 2 seconds longer than he was accustomed to being caught off guard. He'd stood. She'd noticed. Neither acknowledged it. The dinner was easy in the way that surprised both of them, conversation moving between subjects with the natural momentum of people who had already cleared the formalities and arrived somewhere more interesting. She challenged 3 of his positions on urban development. He listened, revised one of them, held firm on the other 2. She respected that more than if he'd agreed. He could tell by the way her expression shifted. A slight brightening, a quality of attention that sharpened rather than softened. At some point during the second hour, his hand had rested on the table close enough to hers that the outer edge of his little finger grazed the outer edge of hers. A contact so small it barely registered anatomically. It registered in every other possible way. Neither of them moved. The photographer, if you could call them that, more accurately a 20-something with an Instagram account and a table near the window, had captured the moment without either of them knowing. The angle was good, the amber light was generous, and the image had a quality of accidental intimacy that made it look more significant than it was. Or exactly as significant as it was. By Sunday morning it had been posted with a caption that said, "Spotted, Hargrove CEO and mystery woman at Linen last night. She's not exactly his usual scene." By Sunday afternoon, a gossip column called Manhattan Murmur had run with it under the headline, "CEO of Hargrove Group and Cleaning Crew Employee, a Downtown Romance." By Sunday evening, Adam's phone had received 14 texts from board members, 2 missed calls from his mother, and 1 message from his head of PR that contained the word narrative 4 times in 6 sentences. Evelyn found out from Diana, who sent her the article at 8:47 a.m., with a string of emojis that communicated approximately 17 different emotions simultaneously. She sat on her couch in the grey Sunday morning light and read the piece twice. It wasn't cruel, just reductive the way these things always were. Mystery woman, cleaning crew, not exactly his usual scene, each phrase doing the small efficient work of reminding her exactly where the world thought she belonged. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a colleague from Clean Corps. Maya, kind-hearted and slightly panicked. "Ev, people are talking. Are you okay? Some of the girls are saying you're going to get let go. I don't think that's true, but..." Evelyn set the phone face down on the cushion beside her. She looked at the plants on her windowsill. The small succulent she'd been keeping alive for 3 years, despite all evidence suggesting she shouldn't. The morning light was thin and pale, the city outside Sunday quiet. She was not, she told herself, going to feel embarrassed about a dinner she'd enjoyed. But she was also not going to pretend that the words hadn't found the exact seam they were aimed at. On the other side of the city, Adam was in his apartment, 43rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of minimalist space that looked more like a concept than a home, standing at the kitchen counter with his phone in his hand, reading the same article. His mother had called again. He sent it to voicemail for the 3rd time. Richard Hale, the eldest board member and a man who communicated disapproval through the quality of his silence, had sent a single text. "We should talk Monday. Optics." Adam set his phone face down on the marble counter. He thought about Evelyn reading this in her apartment, whether she'd seen it yet, what her face looked like when something landed in the exact place it was designed to hurt, whether she let it show, or whether she did what she always seemed to do, which was hold herself very still and give nothing away. He thought about calling her. He didn't. Not because he didn't want to, but because he wasn't sure yet what he would say. He'd spent his entire adult life making decisions with clarity and speed. The ability to assess, commit, execute without hesitation was the thing that had built everything he owned. This felt different. This felt like a decision that would cost something real, regardless of which direction he chose. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wasn't sure he trusted himself to choose correctly. Outside, Manhattan moved through its Sunday with characteristic indifference. The city had no opinion about what happened next. It never did. But the people in it, the board members and the colleagues and the strangers with Instagram accounts and the mothers who called twice on Sunday mornings, had enough opinions for everyone. And somewhere between the 43rd floor and a Brooklyn apartment, with a succulent on the windowsill, two people were sitting with the weight of all of them, each alone, each quieter than they wanted to be. Adam went cold on a Wednesday. Not dramatically, not with a confrontation or a declared distance or any of the clean, honest cruelty that might have been easier to navigate. He went cold the way certain buildings lose heat in winter, gradually from the outside in until the interior temperature has dropped so significantly that you can no longer remember what warmth felt like in the rooms. Evelyn noticed it in the small things first. A message she'd sent Tuesday evening. Nothing significant. A question about a book he'd mentioned during their phone call, the kind of low-stakes exchange that had become quietly natural between them. Sat unread until Thursday morning, when it received a single-word response. Haven't read it yet. Full stop, no follow-through, no thread pulled. She told herself it meant nothing. People got busy, CEOs especially. She understood the weight of a calendar like his better than most, having spent months watching it govern an entire floor of people. Then Friday came. He'd mentioned, offhandedly during a conversation the previous week, that he sometimes worked from the Terrace Cafe on the 22nd floor on Friday afternoons when his schedule allowed. She hadn't planned to be there. She had a legitimate reason to be on that floor. Supply closet inventory, logged and scheduled. But she was aware with uncomfortable honesty that she'd timed it with a precision that had nothing to do with cleaning supplies. He wasn't there. She logged her inventory and left. Saturday, the dinner they'd loosely talked about. Nothing confirmed, just the kind of tentative suggestion that exists in the space between two people who are figuring out what they are. Dissolved without acknowledgement. No cancellation, no rescheduling. Just the quiet erasure of something that had never been officially made, which made it impossible to officially mourn. By the following Tuesday, Evelyn understood the message. She sat with it in her apartment on a Tuesday night, the city humming distantly outside her window, a cup of tea going cold on the coffee table. She was not the kind of woman who catastrophized. She was not the kind of woman who chased. She had grown up watching her mother love people with her whole chest, and she had inherited that capacity entirely. But she had also inherited, from the same woman, the particular dignity that knows when to stop extending a hand that isn't being reached for. She requested the transfer the following morning. It was a standard form, a clean core internal process, entirely routine, citing scheduling preferences and commute optimization. Professional. Clean. The kind of document that gave nothing away. She chose the Meridian building on Park Avenue, farther from Brooklyn technically, but the early shift aligned better, she told her supervisor. Her supervisor approved it without question. She didn't tell Diana the real reason. She told herself it was practical. Adam found out about the transfer from a facilities report his assistant forwarded on Thursday, a routine document he would normally have scrolled past without reading. He stopped on her name with the specific kind of jolt that the body delivers when the mind has been pretending something isn't real. Reyes E. Clean Core Assignment Transfer. Effective Monday. He set the report down. He picked it up again. He put it in a drawer, which was not something he did with documents, and sat in his office for 11 minutes doing nothing, which was not something he did at all. He knew, with the cold precision of a man who understood consequence, that he had done this. Not with malice. He was not capable of calculated cruelty toward her, he had discovered, and that discovery itself had been unsettling. But he had done it with the particular cowardice of a person who retreats from something meaningful, because meaningful things can be taken away. And he had decided somewhere between the board pressure and his mother's phone calls and Richard Hale's carefully worded concerns that it was cleaner to create the distance himself before the world created it for him. He had been wrong. He understood that now, sitting in a corner office with his name on the building and a drawer containing a transfer form that felt more consequential than anything else currently on his desk. Friday afternoon, the 13th floor corridor. Evelyn came around the corner from the service hallway, her last shift in this building, her cart loaded, her earbuds in as always. She was thinking about the weekend, about calling her mother, about whether the succulent on her windowsill needed more light or less. She wasn't thinking about him, which was, she had decided, progress, Adam was standing in the corridor. She didn't know why he was there. There was no meeting room on this floor, no executive suite, nothing that would logically place him in a maintenance corridor on a Friday at 4 p.m. He was simply there in a dark navy suit, no phone in hand, looking at something on the wall that was, upon closer examination, nothing at all. She stopped. The cart stopped with her. He turned at the sound of the wheel, that uneven roll, that slight squeak. He apparently knew better than he should. And they looked at each other across 12 feet of corridor and approximately 40 days of accumulated unsaid things. Evelyn did not take her earbud out. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough to let him know she'd seen everything she needed to see, and that she was the one choosing what came next. Then she looked forward, pushed the cart, walked past him with steady steps and heels that marked her exit like a clean final punctuation. He stood in the corridor and listened to the sound of the wheel fade around the corner. He did not call after her. He stood there for a long moment in the particular silence of a man who had just watched the most honest thing in his life walk away from him and had no one to blame for it but the version of himself that had chosen safety over truth. The corridor was quiet. The 13th floor of his own building had never felt so much like somewhere he didn't belong. The benefit gala was called An Evening for New York, which was the kind of name that sounded generous and meant nothing in particular. It was held on the rooftop of the Meridian Club, a different Meridian than the building where Evelyn now worked, a coincidence that Adam noted with the grim humor of a man being followed by irony. The venue was extraordinary by any measure. A glass-edged terrace 40 stories above the Hudson, heated by invisible systems that made the October air feel Mediterranean, dressed in white linen and candlelight, and the particular elegance that only exists when someone has spent a great deal of money making wealth look effortless. Adam arrived at 8, which was late enough to be notable and early enough to avoid the impression of trying. His tuxedo was charcoal, his tie a precise shade of midnight blue, his expression the one he wore to these events, attentive, composed, slightly remote, the human equivalent of a building with excellent architecture and no lights on inside. He worked the room the way he always did, shook hands with the right people, said the precise things that needed saying to the precise people who needed to hear them, smiled when smiling was required. He had been performing this version of himself for so long that it required almost no conscious effort. It ran like a background system, freeing the surface of his mind to observe, assess, file. His keynote address was scheduled for 9:30. 20 minutes on the Hargrove Foundation's urban renewal initiatives. He'd delivered versions of this speech 11 times in the last 3 years. He knew every pause, every pivot, every place where the room reliably responded. By 9 o'clock he was standing at the edge of the terrace with a glass of sparkling water. He didn't drink at events, another calculated choice, looking out at the Hudson. The river was dark and wide and indifferent, threaded with the lights of boats moving slowly through the night. The Palisades rose on the far side, darker still. He was thinking about nothing specific, which meant, as he was beginning to understand, that he was thinking about her. Hargrove. He turned. Thomas Wren, a fund manager he'd known for a decade, appeared at his elbow with a glass of champagne and the particular energy of a man who had already had 2. Thomas was harmless and occasionally perceptive, which made him one of the more tolerable people in rooms like this one. "Good turnout," Adam said. "Excellent." Thomas surveyed the terrace with satisfaction. "Oh, speaking of good stories, I heard the most interesting thing last week. Someone mentioned, and I have no idea where this started, something about the clean core situation at your building. Some girl." Adam stilled, not visibly. From the outside, he remained exactly as he had been. Posture steady, expression measured, glass held with relaxed fingers. But inside, something happened that he had no category for. The background system that ran his social performance simply stopped. Reyes, I think the name was. Apparently she transferred buildings. Which? Adam missed the rest of the sentence. He heard the name land Reyes Guy, and for 2 full seconds the gala and the Hudson and the 40-story view dissolved into something quieter and more private. 2 seconds of a Friday corridor, the sound of a cartwheel fading around a corner. the particular quality of her silence when she'd looked at him and chosen, with complete, deliberate composure, to keep walking. 2 seconds. He was aware distantly that Thomas had stopped talking and was looking at him with mild curiosity. "Sorry," Adam said. "The wind." He gestured vaguely toward the river, and Thomas, satisfied with the explanation, moved on to something else. Adam set his water glass down on the nearest surface. He delivered his keynote at 9:30. The room responded at exactly the moments he'd anticipated. The applause at the end was warm and sustained. 3 board members caught his eye with the particular nod that communicated approval. His PR director, standing near the back, gave him a small thumbs up. He smiled, said the right things to the right people afterward, stayed the appropriate amount of time. In the car home, a black Porsche Taycan that he drove himself on nights when he needed the sensation of moving through the city under his own control. He took the West Side Highway south and then, without having decided to, crossed the Brooklyn Bridge. He told himself he was avoiding traffic. He drove through Brooklyn with the focused non-intention of a man who is going somewhere specific while refusing to admit it. The neighborhoods shifted around him, the density of downtown Brooklyn giving way to the quieter residential blocks of her area, the brownstones and the corner bodegas with their fluorescent warmth and the particular sidewalk trees that lined streets like hers. He found the block, found the building parked across the street, the light in what he believed was her window, 3rd floor, second from the left, based on nothing more concrete than instinct and a detail she had mentioned once about being able to see the water tower from her couch, was on. Warm. Still. She was home. He sat in the car for 19 minutes. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled. A couple walked past on the sidewalk, close together against the October chill, the woman laughing at something the man had said. A cat watched him from a stoop, with the sovereign indifference of its species. He did not go upstairs. He did not have the right to, not after the withdrawal, not after the silence, not after the corridor, showing up at her door without warning and without having done the internal work that a showing up required, would have been another version of the same selfishness dressed in different clothes. He drove home through the bridge with the city lights streaking across the Taycan's windshield, and the knowledge sitting heavily in his chest that the distance between where he was and where he should be had nothing to do with geography. But he was back the following evening, and the evening after that. Each time he sat in the car across the street for a while, the engine off, the city moving around him. Each time he left without going up. Each time the leaving felt a little more wrong than it had the time before, and the wrongness he was beginning to understand was not a reason to stop coming. It was the reason he kept returning. Something was clarifying itself in those quiet evenings across the street from her building, something that required the stillness and the honesty of sitting alone with no performance required, no board members watching, no version of himself to maintain. He was not finished. He was not ready to be finished. He just needed to figure out what he was going to say. Not the polished version, not the managed version, but the true one. The one that had no exit strategy built into it. And for a man who had never in his adult life walked into anything without a plan, that was the most terrifying and necessary thing he'd ever prepared himself to do. He came on a Sunday. No assistant to arrange the timing. No carefully constructed pretext to make the visit feel professional or manageable. No version of himself sent ahead to test the temperature of the room. Just Adam Hargrove, in dark jeans and a charcoal wool coat, standing in front of a Brooklyn brownstone on a grey November afternoon, with his hands in his pockets and the particular expression of a man who has rehearsed nothing and is about to say everything. He pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B, silence. Then the intercom crackled. Her voice came through with the slight distortion of old building systems, but still distinctly hers, still carrying that quality of unhurried assessment. "Who is it?" He pressed the button. "Adam." A longer silence this time. Long enough that he understood she was making a decision, not searching for words. Evelyn was never searching for words. The door buzzed open. He climbed 2 flights of stairs in a building that smelled like old wood and someone's Sunday cooking. Garlic and something warm and herbed, drifting from behind a closed door on the 2nd floor. The stairwell was narrow, the banister slightly worn smooth from years of hands, Everything about it was the opposite of Hargrove Tower, and somehow more real than anything in it. She was standing in the open doorway of 3B when he reached the landing. Dark leggings, an oversized cream sweater, her hair pulled back loosely with pieces escaping around her face. No armor, no performance, just Evelyn on a Sunday afternoon in her own space, looking at him with eyes that said, "I knew you'd come and you shouldn't be here," in the same breath. He stopped 2 feet from the door. She didn't step back to invite him in, didn't step forward to close the distance, just held the frame with one hand and looked at him with that complete, undeceivable attention. "I don't have a speech," he said. "I know," she said. "I can tell. I want you to know that's intentional. I've spent the last 3 weeks thinking about what I'd say when I came here, and every version I wrote sounded like a press release." Something moved in her expression, not softening, more like a door opening by half an inch. "So what are you doing instead?" "Telling you the truth," he said. "Without the press release." She waited. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere below them, a door closed. The city existed at a distance, muffled and irrelevant. "I pulled back," he said, "after the article, after the board, after my mother called 3 times in one Sunday." He kept his eyes on hers, not as a strategy, but because looking away felt dishonest in a way he was no longer willing to be. "I told myself I was protecting you from the attention, from the gap between our worlds, from all the ways it could go wrong." A pause. "But that was a story I told myself, so I didn't have to admit what I was actually doing." "Which was?" Her voice was quiet, not cold, careful. "Protecting myself," he said, "from something that mattered enough to lose." The November wind moved through the hallway from somewhere. A window cracked open on the floor above, or just the old building breathing. Evelyn's grip on the doorframe didn't shift, but her chin dropped slightly, just slightly, the way it did when something landed in a place she wasn't expecting. "Adam." The elevator stopped, he said, "but I was the one who was stuck. I've been stuck for a long time, going through the right motions, in the right building, in the right suit, and not feeling the floor under me." He exhaled, slow, deliberate, the breath of a man releasing something he'd been holding at significant cost. "You were the first person in years who made me feel it." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. The cream sweater, the loose hair, the particular stillness of a woman who had been hurt in a specific and targeted way, and was now deciding, with full awareness of what she was deciding, whether to open another door. "I'm not a project," she said. Her voice was even, low. "I'm not something you fix yourself with. I'm not a reason or a revelation or a lesson in being human." She held his gaze without flinching. "I'm a person, with a commute and a budget and a mother who calls every Sunday, and ambitions that have nothing to do with you." "I know," he said. "Do you?" "Yes." He said it without hesitation, and the lack of hesitation she could tell was not practiced. "That's why I'm here, not because you showed me something I was missing, but because you are, specifically you, Evelyn, not what you represent or what you made me feel. The person I want to know." A beat. "The person I want to keep knowing, if you'll let me." The hallway held the words. She looked at him for a long moment. Really looked, the way she had in the elevator on the very first morning, reading past the surface of him into whatever was underneath. Back then she'd found coldness with something unexpectedly warm at its edges. Now she found something she hadn't seen before. Openness. Raw and slightly terrified, and entirely real. "You hurt me," she said simply, not as an accusation, as a fact she was choosing to offer rather than protect. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry, not in the press release way." The corner of her mouth moved, against her better judgment, and she was aware it was against her better judgment, and chose it anyway. "You're not a very good apologizer," she said. "No," he agreed. "I've had very little practice. I'm usually better at being wrong silently." "That's not actually a skill." "I'm beginning to understand that." She looked at him for another moment. Then she stepped back from the doorframe. Not widely, not an invitation without condition, but enough. A considered inch. The door opened a little further. He stepped inside. The apartment was exactly as he'd imagined it, from the details she'd given him across late-night phone calls and coffee shop hours. The plants on the windowsill, the gallery wall of prints, all different, all deliberate, the collected aesthetic of a person who knew precisely what she found beautiful. The worn leather couch with the throw blanket bunched at one end, a half-finished cup of tea on the coffee table, a book lying open beside it, spine up. It looked like someone lived there, fully, intentionally, without apology. He stood in the middle of it and felt, with startling clarity, the difference between a space that had been designed and a space that had been inhabited. Evelyn had moved to the window, arms crossed loosely, not defensively, just contained. She was watching him take in the room. "It's small," she said. "It's real," he said. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted completely then. Not dramatically, not with the theatrical quality of a moment that knows it's a moment. Quietly. The way a tide turns, gradual and enormous at once. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her, close, the same charged proximity as the coffee shop table, as the corridor on the 13th floor, as every near thing that had been building since an elevator stopped between two floors, and a woman looked at him like he was just another Tuesday inconvenience. His hand came up slowly. The backs of his fingers brushed her jaw, barely, the lightest possible contact, asking rather than taking. She didn't move away. He leaned in. She met him, not passively, not in surrender, but with the same deliberate, eyes-open quality she brought to everything. Two people choosing, simultaneously and completely, to stop standing on opposite sides of a line they'd both been pretending was necessary. The kiss was not gentle. It was not the tentative, exploratory kind that happens between people who are still unsure. It was the kind that happens between people who have been sure for a long time and are finally, at considerable cost, admitting it. It was inevitable in the specific way that only honest things are inevitable, not destined, but earned. Outside, November moved through Brooklyn with indifferent grace. The city did what the city always did. Inside apartment 3B, something that had been waiting, in elevator shafts and empty corridors and late-night phone calls and car rides across bridges, finally arrived. 3 weeks after a Sunday afternoon in Brooklyn changed the architecture of everything. Adam Hargrove did something he had never done in 12 years of owning the building. He took a day off. Not a half day disguised as a full one. Not a Saturday where his laptop sat open on the kitchen counter and his phone buzzed every 20 minutes with things that couldn't wait until Monday. A genuine, complete, unscheduled day. Calendar blocked, assistant notified, phone set to route everything non-critical into a void he would deal with tomorrow. He spent the morning in Evelyn's apartment. She made coffee. Real coffee, not the cold thermos variety. Though he had developed an unexpected fondness even for that, in a small Italian stovetop maker that hissed and gurgled on her kitchen burner, with the personality of something alive. He sat at her kitchen counter on a stool that was slightly too short for him, and read the book she'd had open on her coffee table the night he came to her door. She moved around the kitchen in wool socks and the cream sweater, unhurried, comfortable in her own space in the way that he was still learning to be comfortable in his. He was learning a great many things. That silence, in the right company, was not a vacuum to be filled, but a texture to be inhabited. That a kitchen counter in Brooklyn could feel more grounding than a corner office on the 30th floor of a building with his name on it. That the most disarming thing in the world was a person who had no interest in impressing you, who simply existed, fully and without apology, and let that be enough. By 11 o'clock they were in the back of his Taycan heading into Manhattan, Evelyn in dark jeans and a camel coat with her hair down, watching the city slide past the window with the particular attention she gave to things she found genuinely interesting. She had a habit, he'd noticed, of tilting her head very slightly when something caught her eye. A detail on a building, a person doing something unexpected on the sidewalk, the specific quality of light on water. It was a small thing. He had catalogued it with the thoroughness he normally reserved for contract details. He had not told her where they were going. She had not asked, which was its own form of trust, the quiet, deliberate kind that is extended not from naivety, but from a considered decision to believe in someone's intentions. He understood the weight of it. He intended to be worth it. His driver pulled up to the Hargrove Tower at noon. Evelyn looked at the building, then at him. "This is your idea of a day off?" "Not exactly," he said. "There's something I want to show you." She studied his face for a moment with those dark, reading eyes. Then she opened the door and got out, and the fact that she trusted him enough to follow without the full explanation was something he filed in the part of himself that was still, slowly, learning to receive things. The lobby was weekend quiet. A skeleton staff, the vast marble space more resonant in the absence of its usual weekday density. The security guard at the desk, an older man named Gerald, who'd worked the weekend shift for 9 years, looked up when they entered. His eyes moved from Adam to Evelyn and back with the practiced neutrality of a man who had seen many things in this lobby and chosen to have opinions about none of them. "Mr. Hargrove," he said. "Gerald." Adam paused at the desk. "How's the knee?" Gerald blinked, slightly surprised, as people always were when Adam demonstrated that he retained personal details. "Better, sir. Thank you for asking." Evelyn glanced at Adam sidelong as they moved toward the elevators. She said nothing, but something in her expression was warm in a way that made the lobby feel less like a building and more like a place. They stepped into the elevator. The same elevator. The one with the slightly scuffed panel on the lower left corner, and the emergency button that he now knew by touch, and the particular quality of enclosed space that had, on a Tuesday morning some months ago, hosted the beginning of something he hadn't known he was ready for. He reached past her and pressed the button for floor 12. She looked at the panel, then at him. Understanding moved across her face, slowly, then completely, like a light coming on in a room that had been dark a long time. She said nothing. The elevator rose. Between the 11th and 13th floor it stopped. Not a malfunction this time. Adam had arranged it with the building's facilities team that morning. A brief, controlled pause, 30 seconds, maybe 40, long enough to be deliberate without being theatrical. Evelyn looked at the ceiling, at the panel, at him, and then she laughed. It was the laugh he had come to understand was the real one, not the polite social version, not the carefully measured response, but the unguarded kind that happened when something caught her completely off guard and she couldn't shape it in time. It filled the elevator the way warmth fills a room suddenly and completely, and he felt it in his chest like something structural shifting into place. He smiled. Not the curated, event-appropriate expression. Not the one he deployed in boardrooms and galas and photographs. The full version, rare enough that even he was slightly surprised by it. The particular unfamiliar feeling of his own face doing something without calculation. She saw it. Her laughter softened into something quieter, more private. Her eyes held his with an expression that contained, in its dark and steady depth, everything that had accumulated between them. The elevator, the coffee, the phone call in the snow, the corridor, the distance, the Sunday doorway, the kiss that had been a long time arriving. "You planned this," she said. "I planned this," he confirmed. "You called facilities on your day off to arrange an elevator malfunction." "A controlled pause," he corrected. "Malfunction implies lack of control. And control is very important to you." "It used to be," he said. "I'm revising my position." She looked at him for a moment with that slight head tilt, the one he had catalogued, the one that meant something had genuinely caught her attention. "Why here?" she asked. "Why this?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because this is where it started," he said, "and I wanted to bring you back to the beginning. Not to repeat it, but to show you how different it looks from here." He held her gaze steadily. "You got out on the 14th floor, and I rode the rest of the way up alone, and I sat in my office for an hour and didn't read a single word of anything on my desk. That's never happened before." "An hour?" she said with mock gravity. "That must have been alarming." "Profoundly," he said. "I considered calling my doctor." She smiled, fully, freely, and the elevator held them both in its small, amber-lit space, like something cupped in careful hands. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a keycard. Matte black, the Hargrove Tower logo, embossed in silver at the corner. He held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. "That's a full building access card," she said. "Yes." "Adam, I'm not offering you a job," he said quietly. "I'm not rearranging your life or telling you what it should look like. You have ambitions that have nothing to do with me. Your words, and you were right." He kept the card extended, steady. "I'm asking you to know this place the way I know it, not as someone who maintains it, as someone who matters to the person who owns it." The elevator hummed quietly around them. The city existed 40 feet below, enormous and indifferent. Evelyn looked at the card for a long moment. Her fingers came up slowly and took it, not quickly, not with the eagerness of someone receiving something they'd wanted, with the deliberate care of someone who understood the weight of what they were accepting and had decided, with full awareness, to accept it anyway. She turned it over once in her hand. Then she slid it into the pocket of her camel coat. "I'll think about it," she said. "I know," he said. "I might have conditions. I would expect nothing less. Significant conditions." "Evelyn." "Yes?" "I can wait," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him. One long, complete look, the kind that reads all the way to the back of a person. Then she turned forward, facing the elevator doors, and stood beside him in the small, still space between the 12th and 13th floor. Her shoulder rested against his arm, barely, just enough. He didn't move. The elevator resumed its ascent, smooth, unhurried, carrying them upward together through the quiet interior of a building that had, on a Tuesday morning that neither of them had planned for, decided to stop at exactly the right moment. The doors opened on the 30th floor. The city spread before them through the floor-to-ceiling glass, all steel and light and impossible scale, Manhattan in the full, indifferent, magnificent clarity of a November afternoon. Evelyn stepped out first. She stood at the glass and looked at it, all of it, the river and the bridges and the density of 10 million lives stacked and spread across the island, with that slight tilt of her head that meant she was seeing something real. Adam stepped out beside her. They stood at the window together, not touching, not speaking, the city below them enormous and alive, the glass between them, and it thin as intention. And for the first time in longer than he could honestly calculate, Adam Hargrove was exactly where he was standing, not in the next meeting, or the next quarter, or the next version of himself he needed to build. Just here, beside her. 30 floors above the elevator where it had started, and not nearly finished. Some people spend their whole lives building walls, so convincing they forget there was ever a door. Adam Hargrove built an empire, and somewhere inside it, without meaning to, he built a cage. It took a stopped elevator, a woman with cold coffee and warm eyes, and 42 minutes between 2 floors for him to remember that the most important thing a person can construct is the courage to let someone in. Evelyn didn't save him. She simply refused to pretend he didn't need saving. And sometimes that is enough. What would you be willing to risk if the right person was waiting on the other side of the door you've been afraid to open? Leave a like, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from. It means more than you know. If this story stayed with you, there's more waiting. No ads, no interruptions, new romances every day, and some that go much deeper than this one. Link in the first pinned comment. What happens in there is a different level entirely.